This is Shalom World Podcast.
Have you ever thought about the clash between our digital world and what's right and wrong? That's where The Porn Disaster comes in, a series that dives into one of society's most hush-hush topics. Get ready for some real talk as we dig into the ups and downs of today's tech-driven desires. Kids, relationships, recovery, we're not holding back. From the Catholic Church's take on porn to why our brains get hooked, we cover it all. Join us as we chat about the messy stuff, the good, the bad, and the uncomfortable. Hosted by Patricia Keane, we've got an expert panel here to chat about porn addiction, what it does, how it affects us, and how we can heal.
Hello, welcome to Shalom World. This is Patricia Keane and we are coming to you from Maynooth in County Kildare, Ireland. I'm presenting a series on pornography called The Porn Disaster. In our episode today, we are going to be looking at a pornographic society. Have we become a pornographic people? How have we gotten here? And does it relate back to the sexual revolution of the 1960s? And also we question, where are we going from here with it? So to discuss this today are my guests today.
Father Alan Hoffa, priest from the Diocese of Allentown, USA. He has BA in Philosophy and Masters in Divinity. Father Chris Hayden, priest from the Diocese of Ferns, Ireland. Spiritual Director, St. Patrick's Seminary, Maynooth. Professor Patricia Casey, Professor of Psychiatry at University College Dublin, Ireland. She is a psychiatrist, journalist, and commentator on social issues. Dr. Kielty Oberlin. She's from Ireland, doctorate in psychology and master's in counseling, specializing in eating disorder recovery.
So we're going to look at how have we become a pornographic people? Is that what we have become? So Father Chris, I'm going to you first because this is very much your area. You've done much research on it and we want to take it from how we've gotten here.
The term itself, a pornographic people, we become a pornographic people, maybe there's a slight self-flagellating aspect to it. It's a rhetorical term, but it's a useful piece of rhetoric because it highlights something about what we have become and are becoming as a society. So it's not the whole truth about us. We can say with a certain truth that we have become a pornographic people. Okay, what is pornography? Ultimately, it's a means to sexual gratification. And not a good means, of course, that's why we're having these conversations, but it's a means to sexual gratification. And as a society, we're sitting ducks for that because we have placed sexual gratification as a quasi-ultimate value. You must experience, and even if you must, if it's not compulsory to experience sexual gratification, nobody must stand in the way of anyone else's desire for sexual gratification. And when we have sexual gratification as, not just as a good thing, which of course it is, and I speak as a celibate priest, but I'm not saying that sexual gratification is not a good thing. If it weren't for it, what would the species do? But when we take it as an independent good, untethered from other goods, untethered from the broader picture of relationship, of human flourishing, of society, when we untether it, and precisely what the sexual revolution did was progressively untether sexual gratification from broader goods, personal goods and societal goods. So in that sense, yes, we are a pornographic people in the sense that we inhabit this society that finds it increasingly difficult to say or do anything about pornography, to resist it. And then the second sense, that's the philosophical sense in which we have become, quote unquote, a pornographic people. Then there's also the very obvious technological sense, because access is absolutely, it's everywhere. A report, a British government-sponsored report in roughly 2013, 2014 was entitled, the title of the report was, basically, porn is everywhere. That was the title of an official report. Basically, porn is everywhere. That can start to sound like a little bit of permission-giving fatalism. Hey, it's everywhere, what can we do? That's not where we're at. But yes, we're a pornographic society in the sense that the underlying attitudes are in place and the technology is there to set those attitudes on speed.
You grew up at the onset of the sexual revolution. And what was considered healthy, like waiting until you got married to have a sexual relationship, is now, waiting until you were married to have children, has now just been turned up on its head. I was asking you off screen that when you were going through it, what was your reaction to it at that time? I mean, you were a young woman and growing in knowledge, and what was your reaction?
Starting my teenage years, when the sexual revolution hit, and I remember at the time going to London. My family went to London quite a bit for holidays because we had an aunt there, and going over there and contrasting the difference between London and Ireland at the time. I lived in rural County Cork, and we got the boat over, and a day later or half a day later we were in the middle of London. And I remember in Piccadilly Circus driving round it with my cousin, and I saw all of these long-haired people and girls wearing pelmets effectively as dresses. They had these really, really mini skirts. Mary Quant, I think, was associated with them. And they all had long hair, and clearly some of them were on drugs because they were falling about the place, and others were canoodling. And I thought, God, what is all this about? It seemed very oppressive and very new and very scary because nobody seemed to be troubled by it. So that was my introduction to the sexual revolution. And then, of course, just around that time as well, pill was discovered and patented and sold, and I discovered that and then my contemporaries that I was meeting, even in church mass, they were all on the pill, and I was absolutely astonished by it. I was 13 or 14 at the time. We were talking mid-60s. I was astonished, and coming back and people saying, it's just a fad. Time, my mother would say, the clock will swing in the other direction. Give it 10 years. But here we are today, talking about pornography. So that's where it's led us to, and a whole ream and raft of other issues that are assailing this country at the moment that aren't germane to this debate. But nonetheless, that time and what happened at that time was the catalyst for a huge change. I suspect, though, that there were probably other issues for hundreds of years going on before that, philosophically and intellectually, that facilitated this happening at the time that it did. Maybe society was right for change at that time, was ripe for it, and society certainly adopted it with enthusiasm, and it has gone unabated since then.
Could you see any good in it?
I think we've reached the point where, for me, the drawbacks and the consequences far outweigh the benefits. I have to say that unequivocally, and that's why I'm here today and participating in these discussions. I think it has gone too far, and that society as a whole, Western society, is in huge danger. And I'm not the only one saying that. I mean, I'm only one voice. There are voices much greater than me, and secular voices at that, talking about this, like Louise Perry, who has written about the damage that the sexual revolution has done to women, and she herself is a feminist. Jordan Peterson, for example, Douglas Murray has written books about the death of Europe, and it's all concerned with these kinds of issues that have transformed the world and how we see it.
Father Alan, pornography is so widespread now, and the exposure to it is massive. As we have said, it's everywhere. So are we not shocked by it anymore?
Well, I think it's become commonplace, and the issue is it's so commonplace that we sometimes don't see the connections to other facets of life. We use this term, a pornographic people, but I think maybe a nuance to it is a people widely affected by pornography. And it is completely changing not only just the understanding of our own sexual identity, because there are definite connections to those hot button issues of the transgender reality of the same-sex attraction, but we also see issues of there are a lot of voices out there that are worried about human trafficking, for instance. And when we look at this, we see that one of the biggest catalysts of human trafficking is the porn industry, because the people who are being trafficked are the workers in the porn, not everyone, but a large portion of the porn industry is people who have been trafficked, children, adults. And so when we see that and we turn a blind eye to it, how can in one way we want to advocate for people who are being trafficked, things that are direct assaults against human dignity, while at the same time, what we see is that people don't want to make those connections and say, well, yes, then we should do something about the porn industry and shut it down. Now, there have been some movements. We've seen recently that there have been court cases against websites like Pornhub, who got so full of themselves that they did not take the responsibility to make sure that they weren't posting videos that were actually of assaults, that they weren't posting videos that were actually of child pornography. They shouldn't be posting any of it. But then we get into the issue of crime. And this is where, again, when we get into this moral relativism and these rationalizations, a people affected by pornography continues to push us further and further away from a sense of just, again, valuing human dignity, valuing the human person, and a moral rightness that is going to be giving each and every human being the best. We hear that all the time. We don't want things like poverty, and we don't want people to be on the margins, and we want everyone to be together in peace and love. Fantastic. But what we won't accept is the fact that something like pornography, because of its multiple aspects of breaking down family and breaking down person and breaking down marriage and harming children, and the human trafficking reality is a wedge that keeps going deeper and deeper and splitting society further and further from those simple, basic, even from a secular standpoint, the things that we want: happiness, joy. You are going to struggle. And I used this in a previous segment. Looking for love in all the wrong places. We're going to continue to look for happiness and joy in all the wrong places, and this is not the only, but a large influence in this regard. Is this issue of pornography?
Patricia, you wanted to come in.
I just wanted to confirm what Father Alan is saying. Clinically, I have dealt with people who were trafficked into Ireland for prostitution. And so it's happening on the ground. People like me are being asked to see and treat people who have been brought across from Africa or Asia for the purposes of prostitution, and in Dublin kept in houses where they're not allowed to leave from, and they manage to escape somehow or other, but that is going on under our noses. So we can't afford to separate that from pornography. It's all part of the same.
Because it's feeding. They have to have a live feed.
They do. And these people are coming in, many of them, they're coming in for prostitution, and some of them are also being used for pornographic purposes.
Like we established with the pornography issue, is one of the big pieces is that we're worried about the moment, but we're not worried about the after effect. And that's not only what we spoke about in the previous segment about what it does to the body, what it does to the mind, the chemicals and all of that, but also past that, what it does to our societies. And that is very, very important to consider. Our society is consumed with just the here and now in the moment. But when you look at the long-term child development, moral development, social development, human development, we are stunting ourselves because of this, because we're isolating in on self and all of the things that has helped humanity grow over centuries, which is the dynamic between persons. This is just pulling people back into a self-serving, self-interested, self-isolating reality that isn't serving the human family.
But I'm going to go to you in a sec, okay? And I know you want to get in, but you said something there that I want to come back to. You said about splitting societies, the defragmentation of societies. And the question I have around that is, as society becomes more fragmented, then do we as people become more detached from the reality of what is happening?
Oh, I definitely think so. There becomes a disillusionment. One of the things that's commonly associated, and I believe I've referenced this before, and we've said it in multiple ways, is that word fantasy. Creating this mirage, creating this utopia that we can enter into. And that's the thing about...
Just give me an example of the utopia.
Well, for instance, a person comes and they have their family and they have their work and they have all of these responsibilities and they have to go out and take take care of their property and all of these things. And now what do I get to do? I get to come in, close the door, and detach from all of that. Nothing else matters. And I get to enter into this world where all I get to see is these two people or this one person engaging in some type of sexual act. Again, as we had also stated, we're not taking into effect the other part. Father had spoken about this, the other part of this person's life. No one looks at, has that person been trafficked who's on the other side? Is that person dead who is on that screen because of suicide or drugs or murder connected with those in the pornography industry? So I think that it is that ability to find separation. And while that may be appealing to be able to get a release, we talk about healthier ways to be able to release from the stresses and the rigors of life, but entering into something that's completely other and that is outside of what normal reality really is, then we will try to reconcile that by bringing that fantasy and that bad fantasy back into reality. And this is where you see all of these offenses against the conjugal act that happen in marriages, in relationships between persons.
Father Chris.
When someone does a line of coke recreationally at the weekend and they don't have any quote-unquote problem with it, they can leave it or take it or leave it, and it's just a weekend thing. I don't know whether that works for many people. It seems to me it's frightfully addictive. However, if someone does a line of coke recreationally, they are complicit in every aspect of the drugs trade. They cannot subtract themselves from the cartel's brutal killings. They cannot subtract themselves from the gangland killings that we've seen in Ireland. They are complicit in that. Okay, there are moral elements as well. If someone is addicted, we're not going to increase the burden on them. But if someone is recreationally and freely engaging in that, they are complicit. And likewise, it's not just a traditional moral statement of, against the sixth commandment, thou shalt not commit sins of impurity. Of course, that's an aspect of it. But there's a much broader moral picture. If you become complicit in this trade, if you become complicit in a mentality that trades in people, well, you are complicit in it. Complicit at the point of consumption. I was going to say the point of purchase, except it's almost always free. But you're complicit at the point of consumption, and that's a broad moral consideration that should speak to people of all stripes politically, be they liberal or conservative. What are we becoming complicit in? I think it's an arresting sort of a question we should ponder.
And of course, in certain issues that regard themselves as liberal are quite happy to accuse people of complicity, for example, buying cheap clothes because of the sweatshops in which people work, because of the conditions in which people work. But when it comes to issues like the drug use or the pornography industry, there seems to be a disconnect, and they don't logically follow it on that.
Father Allen, back to you again. I want to go back to the trafficking, because it really is an issue, and we've just had the movie, The Sound of Freedom, highlighting the enormous problem with children and adults being trafficked for sex. And again, it seems that people whitewash it because it's not happening here, it's not happening to us. But when you look at the porn workers, they have a shelf life. And the shelf life is very short.
It is.
And you wonder, there has to be a live feed into the porn industry every second of the day.
Yes.
Because this is all over the world. So what's happening here? There's a detachment around it because it's someone else. But when we sit down and watch porn, as Father Chris said, we're complicit in that also. We're complicit in that child being abducted somewhere, trafficked into tunnels, out of them, and brought into the porn industry.
And, thank God, there are in certain places in the world, I know that this is happening on a state level and on a national level over in the States and in other countries throughout the world, where pornography is being brought up as a public health crisis. And legislation is being introduced to be able to introduce it as such so that proper things can be put in place to save people, to stop people from this. And one of the big things promoting it that people are, thank God, finally starting to make that connection is the human trafficking and the human rights violations population. So there is movement, but it's one of those things we need to move faster, because each and every day, the number of persons who are not only trafficked, the people who are forced into sexual activity that they don't want, which again, we know that that is sexual assault and things like rape, but also in that is death. Is that when that shelf life ends up for that person, or the person who can't hold on, can't white knuckle it for the duration of that shelf life that they're to be in that industry, death.
If you look at some recent episodes of Grey's Anatomy, you see the cover, the sex trafficking in it, the cover, the branding on the girl, and and it's quite educational just to watch how it's done. It's done very, very well, but actually there is a detachment there also, because it's only a show. It's just on script, but in real life that could be somebody that eventually. But the question that I have here is, where are we progressing to with pornography? Where is what we started with the sexual revolution back here, and Patricia gave her thoughts about that. And you never thought that it would end up here 60 years later. But Father Chris, where are we I'm just a minute each on this. So where are we progressing to?
I would begin an answer to that with the thought experiment. Just let's ask ourselves, what is the end product? With the liberalizing of this, that and the other, all attitudes and behaviors are being liberalized and loosened. What's the end product? What does the perfectly liberal, sexually free young person look like? What will he or she be doing? How will life be for him or her? What is the end game? And it's very, very hard to imagine a wholesome, healthy, contented, well-adjusted, adapted and adaptable youngster coming out of this swamp. It's increasingly difficult to imagine it. So I think we need to be asking the ideologues of increasing liberalization. We just need to be asking, what is your vision for the human person? What's the end game? When will we know? At what point will we say, aha, that's the perfectly free, contented, adjusted young person? How will we know that? I don't think we will, because it doesn't exist anyway, not on the present agenda.
Father Allen?
One of the things that we hear a lot in the news media is all about about AI. And how artificial intelligence can be a good thing as algorithms learn about us and help us to be healthier people, for instance. But one of the things is that as it learns about the human person, it learns about the bad things, the things that can be perverted into bad parts of us. We're not that far away from having AI and machines where persons can enter into pods and things like that to have sexual encounters with machines that make it seem very real and stimulating for that person. When you want to talk about the continuation of this, if we don't put a stop to it, that's what's next. And the scarier part about that is we've already seen how technology can be misused to isolating a person, where children don't know how to communicate anymore because all they can do is communicate with their thumbs and not with their mouths, etc. We're seeing that there are going to be people who are going to be completely contained to a home by themselves, not married, completely content, because what they perceive as everything that they need, even on a sexual level, can be provided by technology and by machinery.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of episode 10 of the porn disaster, and as we traverse our way through it, it becomes more of a porn disaster. So we welcome you back to episode 11, and in that we are going to be looking at recovery. We're going to start 11 and 12 are going to be recovery. Where does it begin, and where is the hope in it, and where is the help?
And that wraps up another episode of The Porn Disaster. Thank you to our incredible panelists for sharing your expertise and insights. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in and being part of this important conversation. If you've been impacted by anything we discussed today, know that help is available. Understanding leads to healing, and by shedding light on these tough topics, we are one step closer to positive change. Join us next time for another enlightening discussion. Until then, take care and stay curious.
Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.